The train used to be the most luxurious and reliable way to travel in Canada, but those days are long gone. If you take a Via Rail train today, there's a good chance you'll be late. About 1 out of 3 trips are delayed, with the worst being nearly 2 days late. Via Rail itself admits its long-distance trips are becoming a serious embarrassment due to excessive delays. It wasn't always this way, so how did things get this bad?
Throughout the length and breadth of the land, trains come and go, carrying millions of people and millions of tons of freight.
In the late 19th century, the government subsidized the construction of the first transcontinental railway. It was hailed as one of the greatest engineering feats of the time, made possible through the seizure of indigenous lands and thousands of Chinese laborers. Fast forward to the end of World War I. Railways were poorly managed, and the companies that operated them were in a lot of debt. So the government swooped in and consolidated various railways into one crown corporation. And thus, the Canadian National Railway Company was born, though now we just call it CN.
The 20s and 30s were a kind of a golden age of railway travel.
That's Christopher Greenlaw. He literally wrote the book about Via Rail.
Before the Second World War, passenger service was always viewed as the pinnacle of what the railways could accomplish and achieve. It was the premier way to travel.
Canada's 2 major railway companies, Canadian National and the privately owned Canadian Pacific, expanded routes across the country, and train cars were basically luxury hotels on wheels. But over the next few decades, the rise of automobiles and air travel led to a massive decline in ridership. And so the railway industry had a bit of an existential crisis.
Passenger services in and of themselves aren't necessarily profitable. It's the freight that brings in the money.
Almost everything we use depends at some stage on the service of railroads.
And although the government required both railways to provide passenger service, CP saw the writing on the wall and began scaling back. CN, on the other hand, decided to attempt a rail renaissance.
And they decided to go all out one more time. So everything, sleeper cars, parlor cars, coach cars, dome cars, all sorts of initiatives to try and bring people on board.
But by the late 1960s, passenger railways in Canada were on the brink of financial collapse. So the government had to act. In 1977, the government established Via Rail as a crown corporation to build the future of passenger rail service in Canada, removing a major burden from the railway companies who would much rather be focusing on freight service. The Liberal government at the time, under Pierre Elliott Trudeau, had a big vision for Via: new comfortable trains, high-speed schedules, and improved service. The transport minister at the time, a guy named Otto Lang, said, "It is not our intention to restore the great trains of the past, but to create the great train service of the future."
It didn't quite go the way he hoped.
The government initially wanted high-speed trains, like the ones European countries had been investing in.
France, and the Mistral Express on a special run builds up to a speed of 205 miles an hour.
But the state of the tracks in Canada made high-speed rail travel impossible.
Our rail lines are basically in the same places they've been since they were laid in the 1880s. They haven't moved.
The other mistake the government made is that it didn't introduce legislation when it created VIA.
Any Canadian Crown Corporation has a big piece of legislation saying, okay, this is what this is and this is what they do. VIA's never had that. And as a result of that, they're subject to the whim of the government of the day. Their budget can be cut quicker and easier.
Which is exactly what happened in the 80s and 90s. VIA went through 2 big service cuts, resulting in significantly fewer trains and routes. The other crucial mistake was that while the government owned the trains, it didn't own the tracks, meaning VIA had to negotiate with CN and CP in order to function. This wasn't much of a problem until CN was privatized in 1995.
VIA didn't acquire everything one would think they would need to run a railway, and they still don't have it. Once CN was privatized, their most important people were not VIA's passengers, but their shareholders. Freight service took significant priority to Via Rail's passenger service.
As a result, most trip times have gotten longer over the years, especially in areas outside of what's known as the corridor, which runs from Quebec City to Windsor. Long-distance trains are now scheduled to take about 14 hours longer than they did in 1952. And even popular routes in the corridor take longer than they used to.
The transcontinental trains are slowly being forgotten. The Quebec City-Windsor corridor has always been a priority for VIA because it's the most profitable and because it has such a high population density.
Now, Via Rail and the federal government are planning to spend billions of dollars to buy their own tracks in order to improve the frequency and reliability of trains in the corridor.
Our HFR proposal includes dedicated passenger tracks, new trains, 3 times as many departures, and regional hubs designed to optimize services for communities.
But the government has made investments like this before, and things haven't gone exactly as planned. Between 2007 and 2014, the government spent more than $300 million to improve travel time and ridership along the corridor. But it only ended up making service worse. At the end of the day, VIA is a mode of public transportation. And if you think of it that way, its role in the 21st century is still as relevant as it was in the 1800s, albeit maybe for different reasons.
For every 2 people you put in a train, you're taking up to 2 cars off the road. So there's a significant reduction in greenhouse gases, there's a significant contribution towards fighting climate change, and there is a certain romantic attachment to the steam engine and the idea of a large piece of industrial art moving at high speeds, accomplishing a task. It's relaxing, it's interesting, but yeah, it's terribly inconvenient.
Thanks for watching. If you want to stay up to date on the latest breaking national and international news, be sure to subscribe to our channel, where we also dig into big issues around the world in our weekly series, Global News Explains.